After materials, labor, and overhead costs have been accumulated in a department, the department's output must be determined so that a unit product cost can be calculated. The difficulty is that departments have partially completed units in both its beginning and ending work in process inventory. Using the weighted average method, the partially completed units in the ending work in process inventory are converted into an equivalent number of fully completed units using the following formula: the number of partially completed units multiplied by the percentage complete. We'll discuss this concept in detail in this module. Let's assume you have a work-study job in the office of your college president, and she asks you to calculate the cost of instruction per full-time equivalent student at your college. The college vice president for finance provides the following information. The total cost of instruction is $9 million, and there are 900 full-time students and 1,000 part-time students. Part-time students take 60% of the classes of a full-time student during the year. It does not seem reasonable to count a part-time student as an equal to a full-time student. The part-time student can be converted into an equivalent number of full-time students. If we take the 1,000 part-time students and multiply that by the 60%, we obtain 600 equivalent part-time students. If we add that to the full-time students, we can arrive at 1,500 full-time equivalent students. The cost of instruction per full-time equivalent student is simply the cost of instruction of $9 million divided by the number of full-time equivalent students, 1,500, which is $6,000. A process cost system uses a similar approach. The basic idea in process costing is to add all the costs incurred in a department during a period and spread those costs uniformly to all the units processed in that department. A department usually has some partially completed units. It does not seem reasonable to count these partially completed units as equivalent to fully completed units when counting the department's output. These partially completed units are converted into an equivalent number of fully completed units. Let's assume in this example that 1,000 units will emerge at the end of the production process, right where that little flag is. Let's also assume the accounting period ends at X. So these units are essentially 75% complete. Remember, cost per unit is found by dividing total cost incurred by the units processed. The most important feature of process costing is that the manufacturing costs are assigned to equivalent units rather than to physical units. In a process cost system, equivalent units of production measure the work done during the period expressed in fully completed units. So 2 units that are 50% complete are equivalent to 1 completed unit. Let's go back to our previous illustration. We have 1,000 units in process at the end of an accounting period. Each unit is 75% complete. Equivalent units is the product of the number of partially completed units and the percentage of completion of those units in a processing department. So if we have 1,000 units that are 75% complete, we have 750 equivalent units. The weighted average is the most widely used method. This method ignores the partially completed units in the beginning work in process inventory. Equivalent units of production is the sum of the units completed and transferred out plus the equivalent units of the ending work in process inventory. Note, there is no need to compute the equivalent units for the units completed and transferred out of the department because they are 100% complete with respect to the work done in that department. If they weren't complete, they wouldn't have been transferred out. The alternative method is called FIFO, and it is covered in the appendix. Let's calculate equivalent units of production using the weighted average method. During the period, Core Company's packaging department completed and transferred out 10,000 units, and 5,000 units remain in the ending work in process inventory, which are 70% complete. The equivalent units of production are the completed units of 10,000 plus 70% multiplied by 5,000, that's the number of units that are partially complete in the ending work in process inventory, so that we have 13,500 equivalent units of production. Direct labor and overhead are often referred to as conversion cost, since they are the cost of converting raw materials into finished goods. In process costing, conversion cost is often treated as a single element of product cost. I like to think of M&Ms, materials and machines. Remember, we're in a repetitive production environment. If direct labor is relatively small compared to materials and overhead, it is often combined with overhead. One more thing to consider. Direct labor and manufacturing overhead usually are incurred continuously throughout the process, whereas direct materials are usually placed into production at one or more discrete points in the manufacturing process. Kellogg Company has produced Eggo waffles since 1970. 3 departments produce these waffles: mixing, baking, and freezing or packaging. The mixing department combines dry ingredients such as flour, salt, and baking powder with liquid ingredients including eggs and vegetable oil to make waffle batter. At the end of June, the mixing department provides the following information. Beginning work in process is 100% complete as to material cost and 70% complete as to the conversion cost. Again, conversion costs represent our labor and our overhead. In other words, Kellogg's adds both the dry and liquid ingredients or the materials at the beginning of the waffle making process. The conversion cost, again labor and overhead, related to mixing these ingredients are incurred uniformly. The ending work in process inventory is 100% complete as to materials and 60% complete as to conversion costs. Let's use the mixing department information to determine equivalent units. When calculating equivalent units, we ignore the beginning work in process inventory. Right? We're going to focus on what was transferred out and what remains in our ending work in process inventory. The units transferred out to the baking department are fully complete with respect to both materials and conversion cost. The ending work in process is fully complete as to materials, but only 60% complete as to conversion cost. We therefore need to make 2 equivalent unit calculations, one for the materials and another for the conversion costs. The units transferred out to the baking department are fully complete as to both materials and conversion cost. So we would include 700,000 in both the materials and conversion cost columns. The ending work in process is fully complete as to materials, but only 60% complete as to conversion cost. If it's 100% complete, then we will include 200,000 units, whereas the conversion cost is only 60% complete, so you're simply going to multiply the 200,000 by 60% to arrive at 120,000. The total equivalent units for materials are 900,000, and for conversion cost, 820,000. We can use these formulas to calculate equivalent units of production for both materials and for conversion cost. Separate calculations are needed for materials and conversion cost whenever the 2 types of cost do not occur in the process at the same time. As I stated earlier, direct labor and manufacturing overhead typically incur continuously throughout the manufacturing process, whereas direct materials are usually placed into production at one or more discrete points in the process. In this exercise, the cutting department transferred out 12,000 units. They also started 1,500 units that are 30% complete as to conversion cost and 100% complete as to materials. Right? In this exercise, you will need to determine equivalent units for materials as well as conversion cost. The solutions to this exercise will be provided in the next video.